Lesson number 5, using variables. So in this lesson we're going to look at the difference between variables and input parameters, how to create variables and input parameters as well. So I will do a demonstration on this. So let's get started. So first of all, what is the difference between a variable and an input parameter? A variable is a prompt and it is tied to an attribute. For example, maybe you want to choose a year. It will give you a pop-up box where you can choose the year, run the query, and get your results. The input parameter is not tied to an attribute, so a user can add any value that they wish to enter. Therefore, a data type for the input parameter must be specified. An example would be adding a tax rate, for example, for a calculation. So on this slide, we're looking at the concepts for variables and input parameters. So I'll start at the bottom. If you've added variables in analytic view and then you created a calculation view using that analytic view, then those variables are also available in the calculation view but cannot be edited. You can apply variables in analytic and calculation views, so you do not have to decide on the filters at design time, so users can choose themselves. So you're making the query more dynamic. You use variables to filter data at runtime. And remember, this is attached to the attribute. So there are three types of variables: a single value, interval. For example, maybe you want to use a start date and an end date and you want users to enter that themselves. Or you can use a range with the operators greater than or less than, for example. So this is where you create the variable. So on the top, give it a name, description, and choose the attribute. Choose the selection type. So if it's a single value or if it's an interval or a range, and then also select if you can add multiple entries in this single value, and also if it's optional or mandatory, and you can also specify the default values over here. So in order to do this, you can apply a filter. So just creating a variable will not enable the users to filter the result set. So after the variable has been created, you also need to apply that as a filter on the attribute in question. So in this case, you can see our operator over here is a variable for this filter, and this is the variable name that we created earlier. So this step has to be done. This is creating variables for filtering. So when previewing the data, you will see these variables, and if you want to add entries to this, you have to select the variable, and then when you click over here, you will see the list of values. So as mentioned before, the variable is attached to an attribute. So you have to choose values from the attribute's values in order to restrict the data that you see. Now input parameters are different because input parameters allow you to add any value. Maybe, for example, you want to take input from the user and process it, returning dynamic data. So this could be like a tax rate that you're using in your calculations. So input parameters could be used for that purpose. So the following types of input parameters are supported: currency, date, static list, attribute value, or if you don't have any of those at all. So currency is used during currency conversion. So the end user can specify a source or target currency. A date, so you can use this to retrieve a date from the end user. So you could give them a calendar input box. A static list is a list of values which is static basically. So you've given them a subset of a list of values to choose from. And if it's an attribute value, well, that's the same as a variable because a variable is attached to an attribute. If none of these meet your requirements, then you do not have to specify the type of the input parameter. In this example, we want the end users to decide whether they want to see the gross amount or the net amount. So what we've done is we've created a new input parameter with a static list, and we've added the two list of values, gross and net. So afterwards, when we want to create a formula like this one, we're saying that if that input parameter is gross, then show us the gross amount, else show us the net amount. So this can be added in the formula, so we created a calculated measure on top. You can also have an input parameter type of date, which can be useful when you want to choose an input date for the reporting user in order to create further calculations. This is an example of an input parameter with a date type. So as you can see, it's much easier choosing the date like this utilizing the calendar dialog. Dates can also be selected as ranges. So now I'm going to do a demonstration of creating variables and input parameters. So I'm back in SAP HANA Studio, and the scenario is that you're a consultant at a customer that sells electronics. So you have been asked to build an analytic view to analyze sales data for customers. So 2 marketing emails have been sent out to each customer. Your users want to find out how many days have passed between their orders and these dates, the dates for the marketing emails. So I'm going to take you through the demonstration, which is going to show you how to create the restricted and calculated measures with the variables that we're going to use. So first of all, I'm going to create an analytic view. So create a new analytic view over here. I'm going to call this HA300. And description is marketing email analysis. And I'm going to choose the tables that I need for this analytic view. This should be in our training schema. So we have sales data, and we're also going to use customer, which should be here. We're not using any attribute views, so I'm just going to go ahead and finish this. So the next step is to join the customer table to the sales data table. So I will choose customer ID in the customer table to customer ID in the sales data table, and just checking on the join type. So we have cardinality is one-to-many, and the join type is referential. So I'm also going to add the attributes in this view. So I'm going to select customer text. Just going to add this as an attribute over here. I'm also going to add currency, which is in my sales data. So I'm just going to do a bit of renaming. So I'm going to rename the customer text as just customer. I'm also going to add the amount because that's my measure, and I will change the name of this amount to sales amount just to make it more user friendly. So I'll create my first variable. So I just have to right click over here and create a new variable. So this is my var customer. The attribute is customer. I'm not setting any default values. So this is my new variable var customer. So now I have to right click on customer and apply the filter. Make sure it says a variable on top as the operator, and this is the variable that I'm applying to this customer attribute. So if I go ahead and save and activate the analytic view and do a data preview, it should come up with the var customer. So I'm just going to select the from, select the value for the customer like Becker Berlin, and it should only show us information from Becker Berlin over here. So for our next scenario, the users actually want to see the data for all the customers. So the view should not be restricted to only one customer. So I'm going to delete the customer selector and instead add a measure to determine the amount of days between the marketing email and the sales orders as well. So first of all, let me go ahead and remove the filter which was applied on customer. So I can just select remove filter, and we're no longer going to use this var customer variable, so I can just remove this one as well. And I will add sale date as an attribute which I can use afterwards, and this will be the SQL date. So I'm just going to right click and add as attribute. I'm going to rename this one to sale date. So now I'm going to create an input parameter. So I'll right click on the folder input parameters, create a new input parameter, and I'll call this one var email date. For the description, I'll say the date email was sent out, and the type is in this case the type we're going to select is a static list because that's what we're going to use. The data type is a date, and I'm going to go ahead and add a value over here that we're going to choose afterwards. So 1st of January, sorry 25th of January, and the description over here is first email. I'll add another one which is my second email. And I'll add a date over here, so 2012 February, and here we have our email date variable. Sorry, not variable, this is the input parameter. Right, so now I'll go ahead and add a calculated attribute so I can use these values. So if I go into the calculated attributes, create a new one, and I'm going to call this days elapsed. So days between the sale date and when the emails were sent out. So in this case, I'll change this to an integer. So in the expression editor, I'm going to add the formula days between. And the way this works, you can actually just select it from here. There should be a days between. You can just double click on that, and if you want to find out the syntax for this, you can find it from the help documentation. So I'm just going to go ahead and use this right now. So days between the sale date. Okay, so I have to select the sale date from my private attributes, and date, and this is where we're going to add our input parameter. So this was $var email date $, and closing the brackets twice. I'm just going to make sure that I've got the right number of brackets. So when I validate the expression, you should have a valid expression. So that's fine. I've got my formula. So this is my calculated attribute that I can see on the right hand side. So I'm going to save the analytic view, activate it, and do a data preview for this one. So you can see it's activated if I look at the log. So I'll do a preview. It's asking us for the date. And these are the two dates that we had entered before. I'll use this one. And there we have it. The days elapsed. So we've got the sales date, and we've compared this against the input parameter. So in this example, I have used a static date, but if you want to make it more dynamic, we can go back and remove the static list. So under my days, under my input parameter, I can just right click, edit, and instead of a static list over here, I'll change this to a date. So I'll leave it as a date, and I'll click on OK, save and activate the analytic view. So that's all activated, and now I'll go ahead and do a preview of this one here. Comes up with the input parameter. If I select from, and the button will give you a calendar this time, so I can choose a different date. So in this example, I'm going to choose 2013. So I can just click over here and change this to 2013 0101. So this is January. There you go, 0101. And just click on OK, and there we have it again. The days elapsed, so it's comparing the sales date with the date I've just entered. Okay, so that is the end of this lesson, and I'll bring back the slides. So we've looked at the difference between variables and input parameters, and I've shown you how to create variables and input parameters as well. So that's the end of this lesson. The next lesson is going to be lesson number 6, creating calculation views. In this lesson, we're going to look at calculated attributes in calculation views, how to create a simple calculation view, also the functionality of the aggregation node in the graphical user interface, and unmapped columns in a union node. So these are the 4 topics for the calculation view lesson. So calculation views can be created in a graphical user interface or as a script. It is possible to combine several fact tables in a calculation view, or if you have any more complex calculation requirements, then a calculation view is recommended. However, do be aware that the calculation views use the calculation engine as mentioned before, and this could be slower than the OLAP engine, which is used for analytic views. So in addition to having regular attributes, a calculation view can also contain calculated attributes as shown over here. So they can be created at this level as well. By default, in a standard calculation view, the measures are aggregated. If you want to change this behavior, the aggregation can be disabled. For example, this behavior might not be wanted if you want to create like lists of values, something similar to an attribute view without any aggregation. But then you cannot add any measures in that calculation view. So you can only add attributes in that calculation view. So here, this is the option called multi-dimensional reporting. So if you disable this option, aggregation will not be done. So here we're looking at an example if multi-dimensional reporting is disabled. So on the left hand side, this is our standard calculation view. You can see the values are aggregated, while on the right hand side we have disabled the multi-dimensional reporting capability. Therefore, you can see that it does not aggregate the values. It just shows you a list from the source data. If you want more control over how aggregation is done, you can add an aggregation node in the graphical calculation view. So in this aggregation node, you can specify the columns which need to be aggregated and also the type of aggregation for those columns. When you want to create a union of, let's say, two analytic views, this can be done in the graphical calculation view. It can also be done via SQL script. In SQL script, we can use CE functions. If you are using the graphical interface, then you have to make sure that you map these accordingly. So this could be an analytic view, and this could be a different analytic view. So if you want to create a union, you have to make sure they're mapped together in the target. So in this scenario, as you can see, we have three fields over here for aggregation number 2. For aggregation node number 3, we only have 2 fields, so they are different. Therefore, in instances when a union needs to be performed and the sources have different number of columns, you can set the constant value for the source columns shown over here on the right hand side. So in our example, as you can see, in aggregation 3 node, we do not have this calculated measure, so we're giving it a constant value of 0. So I've logged into SAP HANA Studio once again, and we have a scenario, and that scenario is that you're a consultant at a company where sales with an order value of over 3 million euros are recognized by the bonus model. So we want to create a calculation view which lists the total order value of over 3 million euros as well as orders between 1 million euros up to 3 million euros. So in order to do this, we are going to divide these orders into two different categories: greater than 3 million euros, and the other one would be between 1 and 3 million euros, and also include the latest order date for these two categories. So I'm going to start off by creating a new calculation view. So I'm going to give it a name. and a description as well. Just need to remove this one here because we can't put a dash, it has to be an underscore. And I'll give it an appropriate name, which is bonus sales order analysis. I'll leave it as a graphical calculation view because the next exercise we're going to look at SQL script. For now, this one is a graphical calculation view, and here I'll select the table that I need to add, which will be under the training schema. So actually it should be under the EPM model, and this one will be the sales orders one, which is SNWD underscore SO. So I can just add this over here and click on finish. So this is the graphical interface of the calculation view, and on the right hand side this will be the output. So whenever you click on the nodes over here, they will change the options accordingly. So the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to add an aggregation node. You can see there are several things we can add over here: union, join, projection, and aggregation. So let's start with the aggregation node. And I'm going to connect this like that. And I'm going to add the gross amount in the aggregation node. So this should be the aggregated column that I want to use. So right click on the gross node and add as aggregated column. I'm also going to apply a filter on this aggregated column. So right click, apply filter. In this case it's greater than or equal to 3 million euros. So I will add another aggregated column, which is created at, and if I click on this one here, you can see the aggregation type is sum. I'm going to change this to maximum, and you will see why afterwards. Let's drag another instance of the table into our calculation view and put it next to the original table. So if I go into my catalog, under EPM model, I have the same table, SNWDSO, and I'll add another aggregation node above the new table. And I'll just do a bit of reorganizing so it looks a bit better. Connect these together. And for the aggregation node, I'm going to add created at to the output. Also, I'm going to add the gross amount. Remember, we had two scenarios, one for gross amount being greater than 3 million euros. The next one was between 1 million and 2.9. So it was between 1 and up to 3 million euros. So I'm going to add gross amount again as an aggregated column, and right click and apply a filter on this one. And this one is between 1 million and just added it over here on the right. I'm also going to add a calculated column to the new aggregation node, and I'm going to call this one over 3 million euros. So this is a flag that I'm going to set and the data type I'll set as varchar and the length as 1. In the expression editor, I'm going to enter n and click on add. Right, okay, so now I'm going to add a union node between these two aggregation nodes. Connect these together. And if I select on union, I'm just going to select this option, which is auto map by name. And if I right click over here, I can manage the mappings, and you can see that for the first aggregation node we did not have this flag, so I can specify a constant value of y over here. Right, okay, so that's all done. Now I can go ahead and connect the union node to the output node like this. And in the output node, I'm going to add all the columns as attributes from the union node. And also, if I look at the properties, making sure multi-dimensional reporting is disabled, this is what we talked about in the previous slides. And I'm going to save, activate, and preview the view. So save, and then I need to activate, which I can do by clicking on this button over here. So that's completed successfully. And after a data preview, you can see that the over 3 million euros flag is set to no, and remember it's not being aggregated over here because of the disabling of the multi-dimensional reporting. And we should have a value here, so this is 5 million, so more than 5 million, so therefore we have a Y flag over here. You can also right click and use this auto layout feature. So if you have a very complex calculation view, you can just use the auto layout, which organizes everything in order. Right, okay, so we've done the data preview, and I've shown you how to create this calculation view which does not aggregate. And also we looked at how to add the mapping with a constant value on the right hand side. So we have finished this lesson of creating calculation views, and we covered the following 4 topics. So calculated attributes and calculation views, simple calculation views. We also talked about the multi-dimensional reporting option, the aggregation nodes, which I've just shown you right now, the unmapped columns in the union node as well.